So good morning, everyone. Well, I always have to do this twice. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
There we go. Welcome. Thanks for coming today. I'm Mark Pettinger with the Recreational Marijuana Program. And this is a first for us. You may have noticed we had our AV system redone. And so for the very first time, we're live streaming one of our information sessions. So for everybody else, we realize that's very 21st century, but we are the little agency that can or tries to. So with the assistance of one of our crack IT staffers, Brendan over here is over the last few days been able to kind of make sure that we've got a good connection. So we're streaming live, and for those of you watching at home, we hope you'll be patient with us. So given that you're on candid camera, I'm expecting that you all will be acting under your best behavior. Because we're doing this, and we're still working out some of our camera stuff, we're only going to have basically one camera focused up front. So if any of you are trying to avoid anybody, there won't be a wide shot of the audience, so you don't need to fear that. But in case you have any trepidation about your voice being recorded, I'm going to pass out some index cards shortly. So when we get to the Q&A session, if you really don't want to speak up, and I'll be walking around with a mic to give us your questions, you can write it down, and one of us will read it off for you. Also, we've shortly, a little while ago, we posted the presentation that we're going to be going through on our website. So for those of you at home and at work, and for those of you in the audience, if you want to follow along that way, you can find the presentation on our website. And then on the left-hand side, there's a gray channel, and the tab is Forums and Publications. And then you want to look under Presentations, and the presentation is titled How to Be Successful with Packaging and Labeling. We're also going to be recording this, so it'll be available later on demand in case you want to watch it again, or if you know other folks who could benefit from this information so that they can take a look as well. This is and just by doing this live stream, this is a different platform for us to communicate and share information with our licensees. We hope to be doing more of this kind of activity, especially as we get into 2019. With our increased obligations, we're not able to get out on the road as much as we like to. We know folks like those road shows because they get to interact with us in real time. But again, as the breadth and of our responsibilities grows, that becomes a heavier lift, and it takes people out of the office. So we're going to be trying some new things in 2019 in terms of communicating with our licensees. Now, we know some of you may remember the communication survey we did earlier this year that we sent out to licensees, and we realized that for many of you, kind of the safeguard is the email paper trail, and that's what you like to keep because it's officious, it has all the particulars. But what we're going to be aiming to do is kind of getting beyond the language of the rules, because the rules are the rules and they're in the language of the rules. And sometimes having some common everyday explanations of what it means, we get those aha moments. And so our form and our method of communication is going to try to address that in the future. And especially since we're going to have an expanded audience, because we now have a fair number of OMMP GSAs who we need to communicate with, who are now being tracked in the cannabis tracking system. And also, although some of you probably have one foot in cannabis and one foot in hemp, we expect that we're going to have more folks interested in the hemp regulated market that we're going to be a part of as well. Also, part of our new, I'll call it a new approach, but we extend an invitation to this particular information session to folks who aren't just our licensees. Typically, we invite our licensees to these sessions so they can get the information directly. So a number of you are from the packaging and labeling support industry, graphic designers and marketing houses. Our thought is that many of you do work with multiple licensees, and to a degree that you can become better knowledgeable about our rules, that will be effective in helping our licensees be compliant, because you're going to be doing that work on a regular basis, whereas those licensees that don't have in-house shops won't necessarily be doing it on a continuous basis, so that they become really familiar with it. Okay, a couple of dates to remember. I want to give you, this is sort of a overall before we kick off the session. Our commission is going to be meeting next Thursday to vote on the proposed marijuana rules package. So just be aware of that. The proposed hemp rules, there will be a public hearing in January with potential action by the commission in February. And then our agency is going to be at the Cannabis Collaborative Conference in January in a couple of different fashions. We'll be inside the conference in a couple of, for instance, our executive director will be taking part in a keynote presentation. And then we are also going to be located next door. So some of you may have taken part in our licensing renewal clinics last year. We're going to be using that space this time to give some program and rule updates, not only for our licensees, but we're going to have at least one session for OMMP growth site administrators. So just to be aware of that. For today, some ground rules. This is not a session to complain about the rules. We realize you may not like some of them, but it's really for us to impart information to you on how they're being utilized right now. So if you want to point out how something doesn't work and offer a solution, that's great. We want to listen to that and hear that. It's also not a session for focusing specifically on your particular or your unique packaging and labeling issue. Now, if you get a sense from the rest of the folks that are here in the audience, the live audience, if it's an issue around that there's some consensus that it's something that needs to be looked at or addressed, we'll take note of that and maybe take it offline and work on it. But we don't want this to devolve into a session about complaining about the rules or your particular issue. We want this to be a learning session, not only for us, but also from you, from your fellow licensees and those that support you. And then also for the folks that are online, we'd appreciate your feedback on how this works in terms of providing the information to you. We're always looking to fine-tune things. So again, first line, complaint. Second line, proposed solution. That's the way we like it. For today's session, here's what we're gonna cover. Our colleague Danica Hipschman, who's our statewide director of licensing, is going to give us an update on the licensing situation, and she's going to call out one particular issue with regard to business structure changes. And then TJ Sheehy, who's our Metrc and data wizard, is going to give a little bit of overview with regard to packaging and labeling and Metrc and product categorization. And then for those of you who don't know Anthony Geltowski, Anthony is been with us now for about 6 months. He succeeds Jamie Dickinson in the packaging and labeling specialist role, and then he'll give the overall presentation. And then at the very end, Anthony and I will talk a little bit about advertising and particularly how it relates to packaging and labeling, because there's a lot of what's covered in packaging and labeling applies to advertising as well. And then we'll do a Q&A and wrap up. So before we go any further, any questions from the audience here in the room? Okay. With that, let's have Danica come on up.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in this morning. Thanks for everybody that's tuning in online. I'm going to keep this brief because I don't want to detract from what the main purpose of this this presentation is going to be, but we like to take the opportunity anytime we can to give updates on licensing, talk about anything that's coming down the line in the near future. Over the summer, everybody knows we put out a couple bulletins in terms of talking about how we're reprioritizing our licensing efforts. The volume of new applications was just more than our agency's been able to keep up with, and so what we made the determination to do is we really need to take care of our existing licensees. We need to get their licenses renewed. We need to, make sure that we can give the approvals if they're changing ownership or bringing on new investors. So that is where our focus shifted, and it has pretty much stayed status quo, and I don't anticipate that really changing. We do have a limited number of staff that are processing new applications, but it's still a very slow process given the volume and the number of changes and renewals that we're having to process for the over 2,000 existing licensees in our system. One thing I did want to touch on, because it has been a very concerning trend that we've seen in licensing, and particularly non-compliance with certain licensing requirements, and that is changing ownership, changing business structures without pre-approval. We've tried very hard to take an educational approach to a lot of aspects of this industry. We recognize it's new. People are particularly in a very, dynamic market where a lot of things are changing. We want to try and help these businesses get into compliance, make sure that they understand what it is they need to do. But we are seeing an overwhelming number of licensees that are not following that requirement of getting pre-approval when they are bringing new interests into their business. We are going to be shifting our tactic in that as a result. The education we've been trying to give and letting licensees know this is something that you really need to have pre-approved before you make these changes. It's just not getting us a lot of widespread compliance. And so we're working on a bulletin that's going to go out, and we have some rule adjustments that are coming up that if the commission adopts next week will go into effect on January 1. And we are going to start taking a much harder line approach to these unapproved business structure changes. Technically, under our rules, it's a cancelable offense, and that's for minor investors coming in, that's for bringing in new business partners, or wholesale changing. And so we really want people to not make decisions in how they're operating that's going to jeopardize their ability to hold a license. So we're trying to use forums like this to get that word out that it is critical, it is a rule requirement, it helps protect the integrity of the system as a whole by making sure that the people that are operating these licensed businesses are licensable, and we're not letting people that shouldn't be involved in. So pay attention to those rule changes. They will be going into effect hopefully January 1, and look for a bulletin that really outlines the type of structure changes that need that pre-approval. We do prioritize those. We try to get those processed as quickly as possible because we know that businesses need to be able to get that influx of capital or get those new business partners on. So those are pushed to the head of the line, but we are going to start taking more enforcement action when those rules aren't followed. So that's all I have. Any questions? Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to TJ.
Good morning, everyone. As Mark said, I'm TJ Sheehy. I'm the data analyst in the marijuana program here at OLCC, which means I am the Metrc person. So I'm only going to focus on the stuff in Metrc that most directly relates to packaging and labeling. So primarily, that's product categorization, everyone's favorite thing. What product am I selling and labeling? So we have on our website a few different guides that we've put together for how-to stuff in Metrc. The one I want to point out here is the product and tax categorization guide. So regardless of what license type you are, this is useful information. So this is our cannabis tracking system subpage on marijuana.oregon.gov. The link is right over here that takes you to this page. So under the OLCC CTS information, there's quite a few resources here in the additional resources section. Some of these include things like the lab testing guide, which is also useful. I won't cover it here. But there's a lot of useful information here. So if you haven't been here, I would recommend going there. This here is the tax categorization guide. So this is going to tell you what your product is. I mean, the rules should also tell you what your product is, but for those of you who don't know what the rules are telling you, this may be helpful. So this shows, this is an attempt to reconcile or put in one place the definitions ranging from testing and concentration limits to taxes to labeling. And so this is going to tell you what in Metrc your product is and how that relates to the testing requirements for that product, how that relates to the labeling requirements for your product. Further down in this guide, there's some FAQs and a lot more information related to where in the rules to find information about your product type. So that is a very useful thing. I'm going to focus on one particular category that we get a lot of questions about, which in Metrc is called combined category. That is synonymous with other cannabinoid products. So if you have an other cannabinoid product, you put it in Metrc as combined category. A combined category, something that it would be something like an infused pre-roll. If you have something like keef and usable marijuana together, that is a concentrate, keef, with usable marijuana, shake or bud or both. That makes it an other cannabinoid product. It's not a concentrate, it's not usable marijuana, it's an other cannabinoid product. That means that there are very specific testing requirements around that, very specific labeling requirements around that, and concentration limits around that. So you need to know what your product is and what the testing requirements would be for that. What is not a combined category would be a non-infused pre-roll. So if you're a producer or a retailer and you've got some bud and you've got some shake and you combine them into a pre-roll, that is usable marijuana because bud and shake is all usable marijuana. So do not take bud and shake and put it into a pre-roll and call it combined category. That would be wrong. And if you're anyone other than a processor making combined category products, you are out of compliance, basically. You're doing it wrong. So a producer can only make usable marijuana pre-rolls, non-infused pre-rolls. So if you're a producer making a combined category pre-roll, you are violating your license privileges. So just be aware of what these things are and what they are not.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On that.
Do we have mics?
Hi, we have a micro-tier processor's endorsement. And so does that allow us to do the combined, or are we still restricted from doing that as a grower?
So micro-tier producers can apply for the privilege to do concentrate processing, which means you can transfer out something like keef, but you cannot transfer out a commingled keef usable marijuana pre-roll. So you can transfer out the constituent parts, but you cannot transfer out a combined category product.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions while we're here? Might as well. Okay, sounds good. Okay, other common questions we get. What is the UID in the labeling rules? The UID is the tag number from Metrc of the package at the time it's labeled. Okay, so as an example, let's say I'm a wholesaler and I have, in this example, let's call it, I'm a wholesaler. I have 10 pounds of flour and I'm gonna break it up into pre-rolls, let's say. But I'm not gonna send 10 pounds of pre-rolls to a retailer. I'm gonna create my products, I'm gonna label them in individual, smaller quantities to send to a retailer. I'm labeling it when it's represented as 10 pounds in Metrc, which means the UID on the label is this UID here. Then if you break it up and let's say you have 1 pound of pre-rolls that you send to a retailer, that's gonna have its own tag number in Metrc, but the UID on the label of that 1 pound quantity is gonna be the UID from the 10 pounds it came from. Does that make sense? The whole point of the UID on the label is so that if we find something somewhere, we can at least have a starting point of where to look. So this balances out our ability to trace things in Metrc without requiring you guys to constantly keep that UID updated with the current UID. So that's the balancing act. So the UID is the Metrc tag number at the time the product is labeled. Do we have the mic? Yeah.
That said, is there a problem with labeling that pound that's going out to retail with its own UID relative to the tag at time of transfer?
It would be compliant to have the UID represent a tag later in the process, as long as it's like directly related to it, but not earlier in the process.
So if I take a 10 pound and split it down, I've got a 1 pound increment that goes to a retailer. That 1 pound increment could have the UID from the tag that went with the package to the retailer.
Yes, is the short answer. Yeah. So if you have 10 1-pound packages now, you wouldn't be able to say, like, I'm going to take this 1 pound increment over here, and that UID is going to be the UID for all the other 9. You would not be able to do that because that breaks our ability to actually trace something. But you could, for each of those 10 1 pound increments, each of those could have the UID for that relevant 1 pound increment.
Suppose somebody makes like a 5 or 10 pound lot that they're going to use for pre-rolls. Maybe it's a combined category item even. And then if they're going to make, say, 1 gram pre-rolls, 1.5 gram pre-rolls, 2 gram pre-rolls, but it's all going to come from that 10 pound batch, could they use that same UID for each of those 3 separate, since that's like the mother package of the broken down parts?
If there's no process slot or anything else, then I would say yes. Yeah. So it's really the time of the labeling. So if you're doing it in different sizes of the same thing, if you're labeling it at the point that it's at that UID, then that's compliant. All right. So one last common question. Lab results. What is in Metrc for lab results is what matters for lab results. Okay, it doesn't matter what you have on your paper COA. If there's no results in Metrc or the wrong results in Metrc, you don't get to just have your COA count. It's what's in Metrc. Like all things, what's in Metrc is what matters for inventory tracking and compliance with OLCC requirements. So the lab results is our mechanism to audit what's on the shelf and what's on the label. The new labeling requirements require the specific test value, the average of the samples taken from a batch. So for example, if you've got a concentrate that's post-control study, it has to have 2 increments taken, right? So that means it's going to have 2 potency tests. So what goes on the label is the average of those 2. The lab testing guide that I just briefly showed you the link to before shows how lab results need to be entered into Metrc. And that guide says the 2 increments need to be entered with a single value of the average. There's a reason why those 2 things coexist, right? So what's in Metrc should be the average of the samples taken. What's on the label should be the average of the samples taken. So ostensibly, those values should match. So what's in Metrc counts. It's what retailers, wholesalers, whoever else have to verify the information, match it up to the label, and make sure that the product is compliant, has met all the requirements that can be sold to a consumer. It's also our mechanism to do the same thing. So what's in Metrc is what matters. There is, since January of this year, in the packages area, in the drill down, a lab results tab. If you click that, it's going to show all of the results for samples that are associated with this product. You can see that after you receive a package, or if it's your own package, and you can also see it before you receive a sample when you get a transfer. So there is absolutely no excuse for someone to say, I didn't know whether or not this was tested correctly, or whether or not this was labeled correctly, because all the information is there before you take receipt of the product. So you should be doing your due diligence when someone shows up to your wholesaler, retailer, whatever, trying to sell you product. All the information is there related to testing, and if it's coming to you labeled, you should be cross-checking those things. That's all I have. Any other questions? All right, yes.
So when we drop off a product, the lab results that we get from the testing facility, usually what we do is when we drop off the product, we also provide those testing information. But are you saying that that's wrong? That's a waste of paper on our end?
So the question is whether the paper test results are needed or not, in addition to the what's in Metrc. So if I were a retailer or a wholesaler, I'd want to see both, but it's a requirement and rule that, you know, basically the lab results in Metrc is what counts. So it's more of a business to business thing about the paper COA. So the lab has to provide the paper COA to the person they're testing for, and sometimes we'll request that from the lab or the licensee or whatever else. If there's an issue, like something was done wrong in Metrc, we can use those to basically verify that it was done correctly and work with the licensee and Metrc to get it resolved. So the paper COAs are important and useful. And like I said, if I were a receiving license, I'd want to see both. But, you know, for example, the automated emails that go out when someone receives something that wasn't tested correctly is not based on the paper COA, right? So what counts is what's in Metrc. Yes, do we have a working mic? Okay.
So in regards to testing, I guess labs providing the information, as far as I'm aware, they're required to provide the average for you. Is that correct?
So in Metrc, the lab should be entering the average of the increments as the result. So.
And if the result in Metrc is only representing one of the two
Yeah.
tests, is that uncompliant?
So the lab testing rules that are going to be adopted, I think this week actually by OHA and go into effect in January, are going to be clarifying that all the increments taken, both the field duplicate and the primary for a post-control study, or I think all the increments pre-control study have to be tested and count in terms of passing or failing. So the lab rules should be clarifying in the next month that if a lab is only testing one of the increments, that is non-compliant.
I think the question was misunderstood. In the case that both of the primary and duplicate test results are uploaded onto Metrc, if the average is not can you just pick one? Or
No.
is there a official average presented to you that you must put on the label?
So the short answer to the question of can I pick the potency test I like better, the answer is no. So the labeling rules require it to be the average of the increments taken from the batch. So you cannot just represent the one that you like better. If it's entered into Metrc as a non-average, I wouldn't necessarily say that's non-compliant, but the person doing the labeling still has to represent the label correctly.
Okay.
So if my understanding was correct about learning that particular rule last year, if you have a field dupe test, your primary test, and you're taking your average, I was once told that you have to list every test ID on there. You know, so every test, a field dupe test has a test ID. A primary test has a test ID. So on the labeling of the package, if you were to have the average of a field dupe or this, or even in some concentrates, I've seen 10 different tests come back for a batch. And if you put that average, do you have to have 10 separate lines of, you know, identification from the test result?
So under the new rules, you don't have to list the sample ID or batch number. So that's the short answer. You can list it if you want, but it's not required anymore.
That solves the problem. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So come on back up. I'm going to turn it over to Anthony, and he's going to take the rest of the meat of the presentation of why you're all here. So thank you.
Thank you, TJ. All right. My name is Anthony Galtoski. I am the OLCC's Recreational Packaging and Labeling Specialist. My predecessor was Jamie Dickinson, so a lot of you have probably dealt with her, but I am pretty much the only person in this role at the OLCC. So if you're dealing with packaging and labeling, I'm the person you're dealing with, for better or for worse. And so we're going to talk about what we're discussing today. We're going to start off with why does Oregon have packaging and labeling rules? A high-level overview of packaging and labeling rules. How does the online licensing system work? Sell-down period of labels approved prior to August 15th, 2018. Common issues that I see, and this incorporates the new rules in August 15th that were adopted this year. The other cannabinoid product labeling guidance that came out a couple weeks ago. Best practices, just kind of tips and tricks, how to get it right the first time. Contact and consultations. And at the very end, we'll have a Q&A session. I'd appreciate it if you could hold your questions to the very end. But if something is not clear that I'm talking about, just feel free to raise your hand and we can address your question then. And so what won't be covered today is I'm not going to be talking at all about testing and licensing. That's just not my purview, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I have to start off with this fun disclaimer. You all can read what it says up here, but essentially this presentation is geared towards folks that already have a basic understanding of the packaging and labeling rules. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the packaging and labeling rules. In a lot of instances, the rules are going to be discussed briefly, and they might be discussed in an abbreviated form. So with that said, you are ultimately responsible for reading and following the rules yourself. Nothing I say in this presentation should be taken for what the rules actually require. You just need to look at the rules and read the rules, and they can be found in 7000 through 7190 in Division 25, excuse me, and I've got a handy-dandy link in the PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to start off with a pop quiz to see who's awake, see who's paying attention. Are there any special warnings OLCC licensees must put on advertising? Yes. What kind of warnings do we think we need?
21 and over.
Sounds like everybody's aware that there are requirements. So yes, the following statements must be on all print, television, radio, and internet advertising. So yes, this absolutely includes your Instagram advertising where you're showing off your new products. These warnings all need to be on there. So you've got do not operate a motor vehicle or machinery under the influence of this drug for use only by adults 21 and older. Keep out of reach of children. And I encourage everybody to take a look at 8040 for the specific advertising restrictions and requirements. And we're going to dig into advertising a little bit later at the end of the presentation too. So we are continuing along in our pop quiz. So is it okay to put farm logos on your approved label without seeking pre-approval again? No. Good, I like that answer. So I see this frequently more and more now as people are doing white labeling, and so as they want to take on different farm partners, they want to add these farm logos to their labels. So you always need to resubmit these farm logos to your application that's been approved. And I encourage folks to submit a lot of farm logos. There's nothing in the rules that require you to use logos that are approved in your label. And when you are submitting these, just keep in mind that these logos still have to be compliant with the rules. So they can't be attractive to minors, they can't display consumption of marijuana, they can't say it's organic. So keep in mind when you're working with those partner brands, take a look at their logos and just make sure they don't violate those rules. I do hear some folks saying, oh, the OLCC approved my logo. That's patently not true. The OLCC does not approve logos, we approve labels. So somebody tells you my logo is approved, be a little skeptical and just take a look at it yourself. So think of it this way, most changes to pre-approved packaging really do require, and labeling, require resubmission. And if you look in 7160 there in subsection 7, that'll give you all the changes you can make to your labels without seeking pre-approval again. And those changes are really variable things that constantly are in flux, like your test results, your strain name, when you harvested, and the lab that performed your test. So just by and large, really think that most of the stuff you're changing on your labels will need to be resubmitted. And so with that said, I encourage folks to submit all the possible variants that they could possibly come up with when they are submitting a label. So if you want to do every color in the rainbow, that's fine with me. Just make sure you submit that in the beginning. That way you don't have to do the pre-approval process again. And one more pop quiz. So we're going to talk about strain names being attractive to minors, because this is something I answer multiple times every single week. How about Candyland? Do we think that is attractive to minors? Yeah, that's a pretty obvious one, because it's a brand name or consumer product that is typically marketed to minors. We all know Candyland is a board game that is marketed to kids. How about Gorilla Glue? Is that attractive to minors? Does that violate any of the OLCC's rules? No. So the reason this is up here, I figured I'd just put it up here, is everybody's abbreviating it now, GG number 4. And the reason that is because of intellectual property concerns. And so that's not something I'm really going to touch more about on, but that's why you see it abbreviated. It's not because it violates our rules. Yes?
About Candyland, I've seen people use it with B's instead of A's. And
You beat me to the punch.
Okay,
No, I'm just joking. I'll get to the solutions at the end. How about Captain Crunch Berries? Yeah, we all know that's a sugary cereal that is absolutely marketed to kids. So those are just some good classic examples. So what do you do if you have strain names that are attractive to minors? The obvious and most easy solution is just don't use strain names that are attractive to minors. But let's say you do have strain names that are attractive to minors. Candyland. So you replace all the A's with V's, and I can't even pronounce that. And I think that most kids that would take a look at that, they wouldn't read that and say, oh, this is Candyland, let me see what's in this package. And when you are doing the abbreviations, just make sure you're far enough away from the actual name of the product. You're free to ask me, how to abbreviate it, and I can give you creative ideas as well. The best way to do it is simply just use acronyms, like CCB for Captain Crunchberry. That's an easy way to take care of it. And one thing I do want to make clear, as a lot of folks get confused on this, when you're in the retail store, and if you wanted to explain to your customers that this strain is Gorilla Glue, this strain is Candyland, you can talk about that to your heart's content in the store. It just cannot be on the label, and it cannot be on advertising. So keep that in mind. So if you want to talk about those strain names in your store, that's perfectly fine. So moving along from the pop quiz, we are just going to discuss why we have packaging and labeling rules. And I know some folks might think, oh, this is boring, but I think it's good to have a context of why we have all these rules in place. So the OLCC is statutorily mandated to protect the public health and safety when we regulate recreational marijuana, among other requirements. So one of the ways we do this is we have truth in advertising and consistency. So everybody knows when they get a product that I'm getting this amount of THC, these ingredients are in my edible, this is how I dose my edible, this is how I get the effects that I'm looking for. So the other thing we want to work on is the prevention of unintended ingestion of marijuana. So we've got child-resistant packaging, and then we've got clear labeling rules that let everybody know, yeah, there's marijuana in this product. So beware if you don't want to ingest marijuana. Another thing I frequently get is, where do I find the rules? We do have the rules listed on the OLCC's website. We have lots of links for it. But ultimately, the best source of the rules is the Oregon Secretary of State's website. When we adopt our rules, that's where they get uploaded to. So this is always going to be the most up-to-date rule set. And this link will take you to Chapter 845, and that's where all of the OLCC's administrative rules are. And the recreational marijuana ones are all the way down at the bottom there in Division 25. So if you open that up, if you were to click on that, you're going to see a boatload of rules. And the packaging and labeling rules start in 7,000, and they go to, I believe, 7190. So right now, we're just going to do a little brief overview of the packaging rules. So like I say up there, this is not an exhaustive list of what the packaging rules require. So what is a package? It is defined as the receptacle that holds the marijuana item that will ultimately be sold to a consumer. So one thing that trips people up a lot is there can be multiple parts of a package. So in this example, we've got a box and we've got a jar. So the jar would go inside the box. So there can be multiple parts to this package. And one thing that really confuses folks is package applications. They will submit all their labeling in a package application. They won't submit a corresponding label application. So the package application only covers the physical structure. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the label. If you submit a label with your package application, I really don't even look at it. What I'll do frequently is I will look in your dashboard and say, hey, where is the corresponding label application? I'll shoot you an email and say, where is it? But sometimes I just simply don't have the resources and the bandwidth to see that. And so if you do have your package approved and there's no corresponding label application, you are in violation of the rules. So just keep that in mind. Package applications cover the physical structure, nothing more. So child resistance. This is something I hear a lot of, and I constantly hear there's a rumor about requiring all packages to be child resistant in the future. That's patently false. The August 15th rules do nothing to change the status quo regarding child resistance. So essentially all marijuana items, except for immature plants and seeds, must be sold in a child resistant package or leave the retail store in an approved child resistant exit package. So I'm sure you're all aware this is a child-resistant exit package. So you've got two types of child-resistant packages. You've got single-use and resealable and continually child-resistant. So if the package is not child-resistant, it must leave the store in an approved exit bag. And so only usable marijuana can leave the retail store in a single-use child-resistant package. So in this example, this package is single-use, and what was in it was gummies. So do we think that this can leave the store as is in this package? No, it needs to leave the store in an exit package because what's inside of it, it's gummies. Yes, sir?
What if it was a single dose, a 5 milligram gummy? No?
Nope. The only thing that can leave in a single use is usable marijuana. So this is probably something I would hope that everybody in this room already is aware of. But if you have a label that is not generic, it must be submitted for pre-approval through the online system before it can be offered for ultimate sale to a consumer, patient, or designated primary caregiver. So what doesn't require pre-approval? Generic labels. So generic labels have no pictures, logos, colors, social media icon, website, graphics, etc. All they have is the information that is required by the rule. And only OLCC licensees, license applicants, and medical registrants can submit packaging and labeling applications. I frequently hear from packaging companies, how do I get my stuff in the OLCC system? Well, you can't. You have to partner with a OLCC licensee to get your packaging into the system. So on the left, I've got a really slick generic label design there. And I know you guys all really appreciate my graphic design skills. And the one on the right is non-generic. And we've called out, so we've got colors. We've got red, green, and purple. That makes it non-generic. And then we've got some marketing language. It says grown with love in Oregon. And you know, quite frankly, I would hope it would be grown in Oregon. And we've also got the social media icon on there. So if you're putting anything that's other than what's required by the rules, then it's not generic and you have to submit it to the online system. And keep in mind, if you are using generic labels and you're missing information, it's not compliant with the rules. So if you are in doubt, I can always counsel you and help you work through your generic labels. I'm more than willing to help you with that. So how does the online system work? I feel like the online system isn't very transparent. It can be very confusing for folks, and quite frankly, it can be very confusing for me sometimes too. So this is going to kind of talk about the statuses and when it can be edited and when I start to look at your package and label applications. So once a licensee formally completes the submission of a label or package application by paying the required fee, digitally signing, and hitting the submit button, the application will show as new. While the label is being reviewed, the status will show as under review. When the OLCC requires a licensee to make changes to a package or label, the status will show as resubmission required. So once a licensee submits the changes, the status changes back to under review. If and only if the status shows as approved, the package or label can be used in commerce. So all package and label applications are reviewed on a first come, first served basis. And I just want to make that clear. I try to make it very egalitarian for everybody. I review them as they come in. So the statuses and who can make edits. I frequently get folks emailing me saying, hey, what's going on? The system's broken. I can't make edits to my application. Well, it's very obvious when you can make edits. So if it's in draft status, that means it has not been formally submitted and cannot be edited by and it can only be edited by the licensee and not the OLCC. So if your application's in draft status, that means it's not even on my radar. I don't look at anything that's in draft status. So if you mistakenly leave your label in draft status, it's going nowhere. So just keep that in mind. So when it shows as new, it means it's formally been submitted. So you've paid and you've hit the submit button, you've signed it, and that means it cannot be edited by the licensee. So if you submit it and it's new and you say, oh geez, I need to put on some more colors or something, and you can't edit it. So you'll have to ask me to unlock it. If it's under review, that means I'm taking a look at your application. That doesn't mean I'm actively looking at it. That just means essentially the ball's in my court. I'm going to be looking at it. You cannot edit it when it's in under review status. So when it's in resubmission required status, that means the application requires changes and the licensees can make edits. So if it shows approved, that should be pretty obvious what it means. So it means it's been approved and you can use the label, but it cannot be edited by you, but it can be edited by the OLCC. So, in the instance where there's changes that need to be made, we can make edits and flip it back over. So if it's in denied status, that means it's formally been denied and you cannot use the label, period. So just think of it this way. If it's in resubmission or draft, then you all can make edits. But if it's in under review or new, you can't touch it, or approved too. Yes, sir.
Now, my understanding is that there's only going to be one chance to resubmit.
Yeah, I'll get that in a little bit. It's actually going to be 2 chances, but yeah, I'll touch on that very soon. So these are just little nuanced things of how to submit files in the online system. So the file limit is 5 megabytes. I frequently do have people emailing me saying, hey, the system's rejecting my upload. What do I do? And frequently it's because they are trying to submit a 20 or 25 meg file. The system just says no. So always keep that in mind. And with that said, the system does technically say the limit's 5, but I do see PDFs that go up to 7, 8 megs. So you can always try. But if you're getting errors, that's probably why. One thing I would ask is that you clearly name and date your files, as well as deleting or renaming old files. I frequently get into label applications, especially ones that are really old, that are just a complete mess. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be reviewing and looking at, and sometimes it takes me quite a while just to figure out what I'm supposed to be looking at. So with that said, if you want to rename your old files that were pre-approved prior to August 15th, which are subject to the sell down, which I'm going to get to, that's fine. But, a little housekeeping would be greatly appreciated on my end, and just clear, logical file names too. And one thing I see a lot of lately is, I'm not sure why, but I am getting a lot of applications that are just simply too blurry for me to read. So if I can't read it, I can't do my job and make sure they're compliant with the rules. So I'm not even going to try to read it. I will just flip it back over to resubmission required, and that will absolutely count towards one of your submission attempts. So just open it up on your laptop, PC, take a look, see if the file's blurry. And that's always because it's just you're submitting a really low resolution image file to me. The other thing I want to touch on is submitting similar product variants under the same label application. So the real gist of this is just be reasonable. So if you have similar products with slight different variations, you can submit those under one label application. There's no need to break it up into multiple label applications. So a great example of this is a chocolate bar with 4 or 5 different flavors. That is totally fine to submit under one label application. The other example is an extract box with a jar inside. And if you want a bunch of different colors on your extract box, submit all those colors at once. There's nothing really limiting you to submitting a boatload of colors. That's fine with me. What is not okay is mixing up dissimilar products. So a really obvious one is tincture and an extract. Those are completely dissimilar products. And along those lines are edibles that are all different. So a chocolate bar, a gummy, a marshmallow, what have you. You can't submit those all under one label application because they're dissimilar products. So the gist of it, just be reasonable. And if I do see folks, trying to cram too many labels into one application, I'll ask you to break it up. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. So if I have 5 chocolate bars and then later I want to add 2 more, right? This is a very complicated math question, but how do can I resubmit into the CM application for those 2 additionals?
Yeah, so if the question,
Only see if it's approved that can I edit after it's approved?
no, so if it's an approved status, you can't edit it.
Right.
And if you're changing ingredients, that would absolutely require resubmission, because you're probably gonna change what
No, I mean just adding 2 more flavors. So I've got the 5 and then I want to add 2 more, right?
Yeah, you can do that, and that'll require the change request form, which I'll get to, I think, in a couple slides here.
Sorry.
But no, that's perfectly fine. But yeah, that's something you can do. Yes?
In that same vein of similar product variants and the same label application, if I had a 3rd gram disposable, a half gram, and a 1 gram cartridge, could I submit that all under the same label application as long as all the labeling is the same besides the weight?
Yeah, that's fine. So the question is, can you submit different cartridge variants, full gram, half gram under one label application? Yeah, that is perfectly acceptable. Because really the only thing that I'm looking at is I'm just seeing the size is changing and the serving size is changing. So that's absolutely reasonable. So change request form and application denial. So in the August 15th, 2018 rule change that we had come into effect, we now have a requirement that if you want to make a change to an existing package or label that has already been approved, you have to submit a change request form and a $25 fee. And the form can be found on that hyperlink, but it could also be found on the OLCC's packaging and labeling website. And essentially what this is trying to do is recoup some of the OLCC's lost time, because I have to go in there, I have to unlock it, and then I have to re-review your label just to make sure it's still compliant with the rules. The form has to be either hand-delivered here to the OLCC's Milwaukee office or sent via mail in the address listed on the form. At this time, we cannot accept payment digitally or the form digitally. So yeah, just plan for lag time too if you're gonna do that. Just always keep that in mind. And so for each package or label application that you want unlocked, that requires a new form and a new fee. So you can't, submit one form with 10 different packages and, $200 or something like that. So it has to be separate forms for each one you want unlocked. So application denial. So applications will be denied after 2 failed attempts, and the applicant will have to submit a new application and pay the $100 fee again. So essentially you will get 2 chances to get your application right. Admittedly, I haven't used this function yet. I do anticipate using it in the future, just once people have gotten accustomed to the new rules. I know there's a lot of confusion out there, so I've been fairly lenient. But going forward, I do anticipate doing the denial sometimes. So now we're going to address the sell down period. So in the rules that took effect on August 15th, 2018, there is now a sell down period. So I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that on August 15th, all your labels got automatically flipped over to resubmission required status. And if you remember from our earlier discussion, that means the ball's in your court. That means you all have to take some action to update your label. So labels that were approved before August 15th may not be transferred for sale to an OLCC retailer on and after April 1st of 2019. So on and after April 1st of 2019, retailers can no longer accept products containing labels approved prior to August 15th, 2018. And keep in mind that if you are updating a label that is approved prior to August 15th, that's in resubmission required status, you don't have to pay the fee again. So that's also a great time to polish up your labels, submit all your color variants, all your flavor variants, all your farm logos, just kind of get all your ducks in a row. Yes?
Is there a spot in Metrc or something that shows whether or not a label's been approved? Because we have lab results, we have testing, we have all this stuff, but for intake managers, how will they know whether or not that label has been approved and they're not getting?
Yeah, that feature is not available in Metrc, and I would say if you have questions, you would ask the licensee, and one would hope the licensee would answer truthfully. But what you can also do is you can have them submit a screenshot of their dashboard, and if you have some doubt, contact me and I can look it up and see if that label has been approved. But I think the screenshot is probably one of the best ways to go at it, because only licensees can see their dashboards, and then I can see it too. Yes, sir.
In regards to her question there, I've been working with you and you've been adding a 4-digit approval code.
We're getting there.
Okay.
The label ID
That's
number.
directly relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah, we'll touch on the label ID. That's causing a lot of confusion. So retailers have up until January 1st of 2020 to sell through that old label inventory. And the realistic date is December 31st of 2019, because when they open for business on January 1st of 2020, those labels cannot be offered for sale anymore. And this should be very obvious, but don't wait until March of 2019 to resubmit all your labels to me. I just know I'm going to get crushed with a lot of people wanting to update their labels, and I simply don't have the bandwidth to go through it and approve them all. So yeah, just do yourselves a favor, do me a favor. Yes, sir.
Sorry, one other question. So we are selling through old packaging, getting our new labels approved. So in theory, we would have our new label approved, but I might be using my old label until April 1st. Is there anything we need to do connected to that?
No. So essentially what you want to do is not delete the labels in your label application that were approved. So you want to maintain those old labels that are sitting in there for the foreseeable future. But if questions do arise, there is an easy way for me to track when your label was approved. So if any questions do arise, just feel free to contact me and I can dig and find out when those labels were approved. All right, label ID. So right now we're just going on to the common issues, and these are issues that I've kind of highlighted as stuff I see on a day in, day out basis of folks being confused, not getting it right. So these are kind of things that I want to address. So if a label all labels that have been pre-approved must have a label ID prominently displayed on the label of the outermost container. So we use this as an example. So what's the outermost container? Let's assume this is going in here. So this would be the outermost container. So this has to have the label ID on it. So you can put the label ID on here also, but you have to have it at the bare minimum on here. And if you want to put it on here, that's fine. That's totally compliant with the rules. So when you submit a label in the system, it gets a unique label identification number. And this number is unique to each individual label application. So the format that you have to use is label ID : and then you would have your number in there. And always keep in mind that generic labels don't have a label ID. And why is that? Because they're not getting submitted in the online system. So when you submit a label application, it is perfectly fine for you to use that format label ID with 4 zeros. I just need to know that you are aware of that requirement, and it's much like test results or UID numbers. You can use placeholders there, that's fine. I just need to know that you're aware of it. And I just have to say this, but just keep in mind when you are printing those labels, it must have an accurate label ID number. No 4 zeros. That means you won't be compliant with the rules because there is no label ID of 000. Yes?
Can you add the label ID number to the generic label information just with the information?
So was the question, can you put the label ID number on a generic label?
Yes, or with the generic label information.
Oh, or you're talking about the variable label? Or
I guess I'm asking where to put the label ID number.
anywhere.
Anywhere.
The rules just say on the outermost container. So, yeah, as long as it's conspicuous, as long as it's not hidden, and it's not, the font size requirement, it's 1/16 of an inch based on the uppercase letter K. What folks frequently do is they stick it with the variable information, like the lab results and the THC, CBD values. But yeah, that's fine. It can just anywhere on the label. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, this is the fun one. Where is the label ID number? How do I find it? So the label ID number can be found within each individual application at the end of the URL in your browser's address bar. So the arrow right there is pointing, that is your packaging and labeling dashboard. and that's the packaging section. And down where the arrow is pointing, that's an individual label application. So you go click on that, you go in there like you want to make some edits or see what's going on, and you look up there to your browser's address bar. You're going to see at the end of the URL there up to a 4-digit number. So they're anywhere from single digits to up to 4 digits right now. And this one I believe is 136, so this one is a bit of an old label. Does anybody have any questions on how to find this? You know, if you can't find it and you're genuinely stumped, just send me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out. Yes?
So when the application is in new status or approved status, you can still go back in and look and find it?
Yes. Yeah, you just can't make edits to it. Yeah, you got it. Yes, sir.
So to combine that with the lady's question up front, for retailers, is there gonna be a way, or have you thought about implementing a way for the retailers to type in that code on their OLCC?
That's the thought. That implementation is currently not available, but yes, that's the thought. Right now, it works from our side from an enforcement perspective. You know, when we go into a retailer, it's really easy for us just to type in that label ID, pull it up in the NIC system. But I hope that's the thought.
Yeah, I think it would be cool for retailers to be able to do that.
I agree. Yes, sir.
You do have there is currently a pre-approved labels spreadsheet on the website.
Yeah.
Is that going to be maintained as well with these label IDs and the descriptions at least, even if there's not photos?
Yes, it's a pet project of mine, and just in the spirit of transparency, that's something I have to manually do. So that requires a boatload of work. You know, once I get my head above water, which I hope that'll someday happen, I will update that list. And I appreciate everybody just being patient with me on that. Moving along, so this package is not child resistant. And I think this is a new requirement in the August 15th rules. And I think this requirement might be the genesis of the rumor that everything has to go in child resistant packaging. So once again, that's not true. So if the container holding the marijuana item doesn't meet the child resistant standards in the rules, the outermost label must have the statement, "This package is not child resistant." Now up here it is bold, but the rules don't require it to be bold. It's just bold here just so we can highlight it and everybody can see it. So when you're in your label application and you tell me the package you're using is not child resistant, I'm gonna make you put this warning on the label. So that behooves you to make sure your package that's listed in your label application is accurate, what you're actually using. And as an example, you have a plastic jar inside of a box, and neither has been approved in the OLCC system as child resistant. So let's assume this is not child resistant and this is not child resistant. This box needs to have the warning, "This package is not child resistant." This warning can go anywhere you want on the outermost label. People typically have been throwing it into all the other warnings. That's totally compliant and acceptable. Yes, sir?
What if you have a box that has a child-resistant container inside it?
Oh, you beat me to it again. So, all right, let's assume that this is child resistant. This is not. So that means this does not have to have the warning. Why is that? Because the container holding the marijuana item is certified as child resistant. So let's just assume there's extract in here. This has been certified as child resistant. Yes?
For the purposes of this question, do you mean continually child resistant or single-use child resistant?
As long as it meets one of the standards.
Okay, just one of those standards.
Yes.
Quick question for you. So let's say, for example, that packaging was not child resistant. Would it require an exit bag then?
So if this wasn't child resistant?
But the inner packaging was.
So if this was child resistant and it's in this one, which is not, no, it wouldn't require an exit package because the container holding the marijuana item is child resistant.
Perfect. Thank you.
What about the other way around?
If this is child resistant,
Yep.
so this would have to have the warning on it. I know it's kind of goofy but the scenario is really not going to pop up too often. But if this is not child resistant, you need to let people know that. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Just to be clear, so if the outer box is child resistant, but there's something inside of it that can be taken separately that actually holds the marijuana, and that's not child resistant, then it has to have the warning on the outermost?
Yeah, so your question is if the jar
I'm
is,
just saying that's what you, just edifying, that's what you just said, right?
yeah, so if the jar that's in the, just like, it's good to have visual examples. So this is not child resistant. This is not child resistant. Then this would require the warning. Is that,
I was saying if the outermost is child resistant, but there's another container inside that
That's
may be labeled
not.
separately, that still does have to have a warning, because once you get rid of that outer packaging, you may be carrying around your house in this, right?
yep, yeah, because it's not gonna be the package is not gonna be child resistant. Yeah, you got it. And quite frankly, what's gonna happen is if, this jar is in this box, somebody's gonna take this home, this gets chucked in the trash, and this is what's gonna be floating around your house.
So it's whatever holds the final weight.
Yeah, the outermost container is what the rule requires, yeah. And if you want, you can always put it on this as well. That's entirely up to you. That's still compliant with the rules. Okay, moving along. Always keep in mind that the required warnings must match exactly what the text requires. So no abbreviations, slight variations. If you make a typo, I'm gonna make you fix it. So just look at what the rule requires, get it verbatim. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Don't try and be fancy. You have to have what the rule requires.
If it does fit with your brand, you can adjust capitalization, correct?
Yeah, within reason,
Okay.
yeah. But if it's like, varying caps up and down, no.
Right.
But yeah, it still has to be
It's too appealing to each other.
possibly. Yes,
In quotations, are you required to spell out 21 years of age and older?
no, and with that said, the rule, don't go off of this for what the rule, don't go off of this for what the rules actually require. Yeah, I made a mistake and didn't proofread this one well enough. I'll own up to it.
Where are the updated versions of that posted?
On the Oregon Secretary of State's website. And the generic checklist that you all picked up, or some of you probably picked up, that has the updated warning language on it.
Oh, that's very similar. Thank you.
What's that?
That's printed here to pick up?
Yep, yeah,
That's the same checklist that's on the website, right?
yeah, you got it. All right, so there's still confusion on what the principal display panel is. So the principal display panel, or I just refer to it as the PDP. So sometimes when I'm leaving you notes, I'll just say, put this on the PDP, and that's what I'm referring to because my volume of work, I don't like spelling out principal display panel all the time. So that is the part of the label on a package or container that is most likely to be displayed, presented, shown, or seen under customary conditions for display, for sale or transfer. So by and large, under most of the rules, the principal display panel needs the universal symbol, net weight, or the volume, and the universal symbol. So it's really just kind of common sense. If you go into a dispensary, this would be the principal display panel, because this is what's going to be displayed for the consumer when it's laid like this, or if it's laid like this under a glass case. So it is what your eyes are attracted to at the first glance. So when you look at this, you know what the product is, you know how much is in here, and you know there's marijuana in here. So another thing I do see a lot of is folks confusing weight and volume. You have to express your weight in grams and ounces. So sometimes it's milligrams, but most likely it's grams and ounces. Classic example is you would express your weight as 1 gram, in parentheses, 0.04 ounces. And then you always will put net weight, or you can abbreviate it, net WT, before grams and ounces. So you would have, net WT 1 gram, and then the ounce amount. And when you express liquid, you express it in fluid ounces and milliliters. So the classic example, 1 fluid ounce, 29.6 milliliters. And you never ever put net weight before the fluid measurement, because net weight refers to weight, and you're confusing the measurements. And so if that's something I see on your label, yeah, I'm gonna make you fix that. I know it seems a little bit pedantic, but it makes it very clear to folks what's inside the product. Yes?
Would you prefer net volume?
No,
Just nothing?
just nothing, yeah. So we go after the NIST handbook, which I doubt anybody in here has read, but it's a very fun document that kind of outlines general practices for food and product labeling, and that's where that requirement comes in. Yes?
Can we round up in your example, is this 29.6 milliliters?
Yep. Yeah, once again, the packaging and labeling guide has the rounding. I'm not going to really discuss rounding too much right now because math is not my strong suit. But the packaging and labeling guide discusses how you should round. Yes?
For the sake of aesthetics, we have to put net weight in front of the weight, so we can't just have 1 gram, 0.04 ounces.
No, you have to declare net weight. Yeah. Yes?
For a half gram, are you supposed to put that in milligrams?
You
Or
can do
in
either.
milligrams?
You can do half gram or milligrams. I see some folks mixing it up, but I think most folks are used to seeing grams and not milligrams on their labels. So, yes,
In regards to pre-rolls.
I think that's my next slide. So if you want to wait 1 second,
Okay.
I probably, if I don't get it, just let me know.
Yeah, no worries.
It's not my next slide. So we're going on to product identity. So this is something that changed a little bit in the rules. We've always had the product identity requirement because obviously you need to tell people what's in the product. The product identity is the truthful or common name of the product contained inside the package. So the product identity must clearly identify, so this is the new rule. So the product identity must clearly identify whether the item is derived from marijuana or hemp. So you are free to use cannabis in place of marijuana. And I do understand all the differences, and nobody needs to rub it in my face. I do get that cannabis and marijuana are similar and not similar, but I don't really need to get into that right now. But I know some folks don't like using the word marijuana. So yeah, you are free to use the word cannabis. I will point out that, and I'm going to get to hemp a little bit, but if you're using hemp, you cannot use cannabis. You have to say this product has hemp in it. So classic example is marijuana edible, hemp tincture. The other requirement is if it's a cannabinoid concentrate or extract, the product identity must clearly identify it as such. So marijuana concentrate, cannabis extract. Now I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I make BHO, I make distillate, CO2, I have all these different methods and I want to call that out. That's perfectly fine to do that elsewhere on the label. So, at the bottom, you could have marijuana concentrate, and then elsewhere on the label, you can say, BHO, live resin, whatever you want to, advertise your product as. Okay, now we are moving on to hemp. So, oh yeah, sorry.
Is marijuana extract acceptable, or does it need to be cannabis extract?
Yeah, that's fine. So marijuana and cannabis can be used interchangeably. Yeah, whatever your preference is. But the only thing I'm a stickler on is hemp. So if it's hemp, it is hemp. It is not cannabis. So moving along to hemp. So the new rules have some requirements for hemp. Like I just kind of discussed, the product identity must clearly indicate the product is derived from hemp. So hemp tincture, hemp CBD chocolate bar, hemp extract. And you have to have the following warnings in place of the other required warnings. This product is derived from hemp, could contain THC, keep out of reach of children. You also must still have the FDA statement. And I know there's some confusion as to what the warnings are. So if you go into each individual product's rule, so if you go into the edibles rule, it'll say the label must have the following warnings on it, A, B, C. So you would just remove those warnings and then in place of the warnings, put these warnings in. Yes?
Sorry. Going back to your approvals really quick, if you have variants, say you have a product that you make as a hemp variant and a marijuana variant, can you put both of those variants into your single label application?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, because it doesn't require too much more effort on my part. So if the item is solely derived from hemp, basically you have to have do not eat in bold capital letters if it is if it's a hemp extract, concentrate, topical, or hemp product other than an edible, tincture or capsule, it has to have the warning do not eat in bold capital letters. Yes, sir.
Hi there. This goes back to common product name, and I was noticing something on the previous slide where we have a common product identity of marijuana edible. Okay, and if we go forward to the next slide, we have something labeled hemp CBD chocolate bar, but that does not say hemp edible.
Yeah, you don't have to use the specific product categorizations. You don't have to say.
It can be cannabis gummy, and that's understood to be
An edible, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
You know, like the classic example Jamie always used was Starburst, so that's like, you know, the brand name of the product. But then on the bottom, if you look, it has Fruit Chew. So it indicates that's the common name of the product.
Okay, are we required to have both?
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
you're just required to have a product identity.
Got it, thank you.
Moving along to hemp. So keep in mind, if the product has hemp, or is solely derived from hemp, you have to have the hemp symbol. So that's a new requirement. You do not put the universal symbol if you're just exclusively using hemp in your products. So if you are combining both marijuana and hemp into one product, then it's labeled as a marijuana item. So you don't have the hemp symbol and you don't have the hemp warnings. So you should never ever have a label that has both of the symbols on them. That's just don't ever do that. All right, pre-rolls. So this has caused a boatload of confusion. So the rules now require you to list the weight of usable marijuana as well. So when you are labeling pre-rolls, you have to list the net weight and the weight of usable marijuana. So the net weight is the weight of marijuana or usable marijuana plus the paper plus the filter or tip. So all three of those components are what the net weight is. So the net weight, I always like to remind folks that it must be on the bottom 30% of the principal display panel. So you can't have net weight all the way up here. It has to be, you know, roughly below here to be on the bottom 30% of the PDP. The weight of the usable marijuana must be listed in grams. The rule only says grams. It does not say ounces as well. But if you want to list ounces preceding grams, or following grams, excuse me, that's absolutely fine. So the big thing now is multi-packs of pre-rolls. So if you are making a multi-pack, you have to make it clear how much usable marijuana is in each pre-roll. And so here's an easy example. It contains 5 half-gram usable marijuana pre-rolls. So that satisfies 2 requirements. That gets, if you have that on the bottom 30% of your PDP, that says, hey, this product is marijuana pre-roll, and there's half a gram in each one of them. And the other thing I see with a lot of these pre-roll packs is using different strains or having multiple strains in the pack. So if you are going that route, keep in mind you have to list all the information for each strain that's in there. So you have to list the harvest date, strain name, test results, lab that performed the test, et cetera, et cetera. And then you also need to make it very clear to the consumer what strain is in each pre-roll. So some folks do that with a color coding system, and they put little dots on the tip or a sticker, or some folks do like in a little accordion where they list the strain names out and the pre-roll rests in the accordion. And now if you're going that route, you do need to submit images as well of what that looks like as well. I just have to make sure that that's compliant with the rules. And if I do see that you are doing different strain multi-packs, I am going to ask you, how are you differentiating for consumers what's in each strain? So there's all kinds of creative ways to address this, and you know, as long as you're being compliant with the rules, however you want to achieve it, that's fine with me. Health claims. So this is nothing new in the rules. The rules didn't change anything regarding the status quo of this. The way we prohibit health claims is it's untruthful and misleading to have health claims. This is something I see more and more of lately. I think as folks are trying to differentiate their products in the marketing or in the market with different kind of marketing hype and more kind of wellness, holistic products. Health claims describe a relationship between a substance and a reduced risk of disease or health-related condition. Essentially, you cannot make health claims if your label is not supported by the totality of publicly available scientific evidence. In the packaging and labeling guide, this sentence is followed by a few more sentences. So take a look at the packaging and labeling guide. Essentially, you really have to have serious peer-reviewed scientific evidence showing me that this product actually does meet these claims that you're stating on the label. So you can see from the third paragraph there, essentially you cannot make these claims or imply that your product is having these health effects. The first one is a very classic example. So Rick Simpson oil will reduce your risk of cancer. That is absolutely an impermissible health claim. This cannabis tincture will help with chronic inflammation. So this one gets towards an implied claim because chronic inflammation is the symptom of a class of disease, which is rheumatoid arthritis. So you're kind of saying, hint, hint, wink, wink, this will help with your rheumatoid arthritis. You can't make those kind of claims on your labels. If you are working with folks that want to make these claims and insist on them, most of the time I'll have you reword it, I'll have you just wholesale delete it. But I encourage folks to go to the FDA's website and look at nutrition supplement guidelines as well as the FDA structure function claims. And I'm not going to really talk too much about health claims because it's a very nuanced discussion. But if you're working in that arena, go look at what the FDA requires. And that's kind of how I review your labels. Organic claims. So by and large, I think folks get this now. You cannot call your cannabis organic cannabis or marijuana. The USDA absolutely does not certify marijuana as organic. So to state the product as organic or use the USDA seal, you have to have your product certified as organic. So like I just said, that's not happening right now. Might happen in the future, but right now, no. You can absolutely use certified kind or clean green certification as long as it's truthful, as long as your product has actually, or your business has been certified by those agencies, that's totally fine. Just don't make false equivalents on your labels between those organizations and USDA certification. I will say no. When you list, so I do see folks listing their organic ingredients on product labels that require you to list your ingredients. This is a very nuanced discussion as well, which I'm not really going to dig too deep into. Essentially, when I review organic labeling requirements, I look at what the USDA requires. So if you are working in that arena, go follow that link and take a look at the USDA's website of what is required for organic labeling. The one big thing I see on the front is on the principal display panel is you would say, let's say made with a certain ingredient. So like made with organic wheat. That is absolutely fine if the product is made of at least 70% organic ingredients, not including salt or water. So you could have a statement such as made with organic wheat that lists the specific organic products. So then the organic ingredients must be identified in the ingredients list, and the label must identify the USDA accredited certifying agent on the information panel. And you cannot just have a generic statement made with organic ingredients on the principal display panel. So if you've got like, I don't know, organic cocoa, and that's the only thing that's organic in your product, you can't put that on the principal display panel. So if you don't meet that specific, that 70% threshold, and you have less than 70% organic ingredients, you're not required to call them out on your, what the USDA calls your information panel. Essentially, that's the nutrition template. So you can identify those certified organic ingredients and the percentage of organic ingredients, but you can't include the USDA seal anywhere or use the word organic on the principal display panel. So nutrition templates. This is a new requirement in the August 15th, 2018 rules. And the templates are available on the OLCC's packaging and labeling website. And there's a hyperlink in the presentation if you can't find it. And one thing I really want to hit home and strongly emphasize is the nutrition templates must exactly match the ones provided by the OLCC. Don't get fancy, don't reinvent the wheel, don't remove those black bars, don't put in pink bars, don't remove the box that's around everything, don't add daily value percentages, just stick to what these are. You can, slightly change the color, that's fine with me as long as it's readable. But, I would say from a consistency standpoint, it's nice just to use these labels because these are taken exactly from food labeling. One thing I do want to hit on is that the tabular display and the linear display should be used only if you have a small package. So the vertical display is the one that should be getting most likely used most of the time. So if the package you're using is big enough to hold that vertical display, I'm probably going to make you put the vertical display on there. Just keep that in mind. The other thing as we transition to using this template is you always have to list So when you list the serving size, and here we've got the example of 1 cookie. So preceding that serving size, you must have either a volume or a weight measurement. So if it was like a tincture, you would say 1 serving size, 1/4 teaspoon, followed by the milliliter, whatever that required serving is. So small and tiny container labeling rules. So the new rules make it very, very clear that any container that's holding a marijuana item has to have some kind of label affixed to it. So that goes all the way back to preventing unintended consumption of marijuana item, and it also allows folks to trace where their products came from. So this slide isn't very exciting. I'm not going to parrot the rules out here, but the rules can be found in 7030 subsection 11 for small, and the tiny ones can be found in subsection 12. And then I would encourage you to take a look at page 9 of the checklist. That gives you a good visual example of what exactly is required on these labels. Just as a bit of context, just look at these small, tiny container labels as being abbreviated labels. And like I just said, it lets people know there's marijuana in it, how much marijuana is in it, where it came from, who made it. And so always keep in mind too, that if you have a small jar holding an extract, the lid is almost always going to be the principal display panel, because on a jar like this, let's just assume this is a little bit smaller, and that's what most extract jars come in. There is nowhere on this jar for a principal display panel. So what you can do is you can put the PDP up here on the lid, and then all the other required information either on a wraparound or just a circular label, and stick it on the bottom. So it's perfectly fine to break your label up into constituent parts. You just have to meet that principal display panel requirement. Yes?
Suppose you have like a child-resistant lid like that with all the texture on top you can't affix a label to very easily. Would it be permissible to just use the side?
I'd say that really just depends on the circumstances and my individual evaluation of that. You know, this is probably a bad example to bring up here, but I just don't have one of the extract jars that folks are currently using. Yes?
In regards to small containers, I know that the principal display panel, it consists of the net weight, the product identity, and
Universal symbol.
yeah, but on the small container, I noticed that in the rules that you do not need to include net weight on the small container.
On the tiny container.
Tiny.
Yeah, so tiny container, yeah. So if you've got a small container, you've got product identity, so usually marijuana extract, cannabis extract, universal symbol, and then the net weight on the PDP. But if you've got a small container, and that's 2 inches in diameter or less, a tiny container, that's what a tiny container is. That would just be the universal symbol and the product identity. So, always keep in mind too, when you're using small and tiny container labels, the package containing the product on the outside always has to have a full and compliant label. I know there's some duplication going on, but you can't, take off the product identity, universal symbol on this one. Yes?
So back to your statement a minute ago, so does the vape cartridge need to have the weight or
No.
the product identity? Okay.
No, the vape, yeah, and this is a good topic to talk about. So when you've got cartridges, all you have to do is put the universal symbol on there. It does not need a label, just because those are too small. And one thing I do want to harp on is that if you do have vape cartridges and you're submitting an application, you have to submit an image of the cartridge with the universal symbol on it. Yes, I know it's pedantic, but it is part of the labeling rules, and I just need to know that you are aware of it. So moving along to topicals. This changed ever so slightly. So you have to list the concentration of THC and CBD as a percentage with topicals. Now keep in mind OHA's limits is 6% of THC. CBD, sky's the limit, but THC is 6%. And if you want to list milligrams elsewhere on the label, that's fine, but you must make it very obvious and clear what the percentage is up front, and not list the milligrams in kind of a misleading way. Because I know for some folks, when they do the math, the percentage doesn't look very high. The other thing I do see is the rules do require you to list an amount suggested for a consumer for use by a consumer at any one time. So just a dime size amount, a teaspoon, a tablespoon. As the processor, you kind of know what people should be using, and you have to give me on the label some kind of serving size. Now we're going into what I call the oddball products. These products can be very challenging to label. These are moon rocks, asteroids, and infused joints. So when I say moon rocks and asteroids, I think folks use these terms a lot interchangeably, but essentially both of these refer to usable marijuana that is rolled in some kind of extract and then usually rolled in keef and then sometimes vacuum sealed and compressed. So that's what moon rocks and asteroids are. And then infused joint is essentially is a pre-roll with usable marijuana that has either a concentrate or extract added to it. So typically you'll see folks taking a pre-roll, dipping it in BHO, and then rolling it in keef. That's an infused joint. So all these, so if you're adding added substances, and I'm not going to get into the definition, to usable marijuana concentrates or extracts, it gets labeled under 7120 as an other cannabinoid product. So you obviously need to go take a look at the rules, but essentially the only thing that's really different with 7120 is you have to list the processor's place of address and the packagers if different from the processors. And you also have to list the ingredients in descending order of predominance by weight or volume. So typically, let's use moon rocks and probably an infused joints too, as an example. So in your ingredients list, you would have to be very specific. Your first ingredient would most likely be usable marijuana, then followed by marijuana extract, and then you could put in parentheses if you want, let's say BHO or distillate, whatever extract you're using, if you want to call that out. You don't have to. And then lastly, you would put marijuana concentrate, because keef is a concentrate, and then you could put in parentheses keef. So always keep this in mind, and I think folks, what they've been doing in the past, and which has not been compliant with the rules, is these other cannabinoid products have to be tested for final potency, for THC and CBD. So those potency values are going to be the ones that you are putting on the label. And the test that perform that test, the lab that performed that test and the test date will need to be on the label. So think of this product sort of like as an edible. When you have an edible label, you're not really looking at, you don't have to put the lab results for all the constituent parts that go into it. So you would just have one lab result, but if it has to get retested, of course, you've got multiple lab results on there. But at this stage, it probably wouldn't have to get retested. Yes, sir?
So in this instance where you have to show where like the concentrate's coming from and where the usable pot is coming from, is that the case with edibles where if they're purchasing like bulk distillate to put into cookies, for example, does that whoever processed that distillate has to be on the label as well?
No.
Okay.
No, and this is a good time to talk about edible ingredient labeling, and I probably should have put this in the slide. But whatever marijuana product you're putting in there has to conform with one of our product identities that are in the rule. So like if you're using distillate in your edibles, you would say marijuana extract. And then if you wanted to call out that it's distillate, you can put in parentheses distillate in there.
So distillate isn't clear enough that it's extract?
No, you have to use that specific terminology.
Okay.
Because, I think as the market evolves, I see some folks calling or having concentrate methods that they call distillate too now. So it gets really confusing. Yes?
So when you said the place that it comes from, and you put address in there, you don't really mean address, right? You mean name?
No, you have to list your address. That's what the rules
For
require.
these processors?
Yep.
And on a public item you're selling?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay. That's very
You can't put a mailing address.
You can put a mailing address. If you look at what the place of address definition of is in the rules, it says a mailing address. So,
You can't just use city, state?
no, it has to be an accurate way of contacting you, yeah. And if I just see somebody put like Portland, Oregon, no, you have to give me your address. Anything else on this fun subject? Yes, sir.
Just to be clear, so it's not enough to simply list cannabis as an ingredient and say an edible. If we are working from a concentrate per se, we have to list that cannabis concentrate is an ingredient?
Yeah, so let's take the example of you're making a concentrate with coconut oil, and then you're taking usable marijuana and you're infusing that. So the way you'd list that is you would say concentrate, and then in parentheses you would say usable marijuana, or probably most likely you would first start with the coconut oil, and then you would say comma usable marijuana. So you'd have to list what your concentrate's being made of, and that's usually something that I'm attuned to when I look at your label, and I'll tell you how to label it correctly that way. Does that make sense?
I believe so. Let's say in the case that, like this gentleman was explaining, where there's a concentrate that's purchased from, say, a third-party processor, and that methodology that you're describing that was not used. Let's say it was a concentrate that was directly added to the food mixture. Would that similarly conform to the requirements that you're stating here?
So if it's just marijuana concentrate and there's nothing else in it, you would just say marijuana or cannabis concentrate. But, under the concentrate rules, you can make concentrates by taking, animal or vegetable fats and infusing them together. So that's just something to keep in mind. Lastly, on these moon rocks and asteroids, so keep in mind you have to say that it's derived from marijuana / cannabis or industrial hemp. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about testing, and I will not after this slide. So the Oregon Health Authority sets the concentration and serving size limits. The OLCC has nothing to do with that. So if you want to complain to me, there's nothing I can do about it, So one oddball thing that comes up is capsules. So those are labeled under the tincture rules. And the capsules are subject to the 10 milligrams of THC per serving as a max, and then 100 milligrams in the container. And so if this is news to folks in here, I strongly encourage you to go take a look at this citation up on the Oregon Secretary of State's website and print this out. I have this printed out at my desk because every now and then I have a question. Everybody should be very, very aware of these limits. Suppositories, those are subject to the edible limits and labeled as an other cannabinoid product. Who would have thought, right? So 5 and 50 for suppositories. Transdermal patches, so this is a very weird one. They are subject to edible limits, but they are labeled as a topical. So your transdermal patches cannot have any more than 50 milligrams of THC in the package and then 5 milligrams in a serving. But they're labeled as a topical. And so just to be clear, topical rules say you must list it as a percentage. But when you're listing transdermal concentration, you would list it in milligrams, because it's subject to the edible potency limits. Very fun one, I know, and yeah, I understand if that one's difficult for you to get right the first time. So maybe roughly 3 weeks ago, I issued guidance for how to label other cannabinoid products, and this should have come in your email inbox if you are a licensee, but if you're not a licensee, you wouldn't have gotten this bulletin. So if you are working in this arena, labeling these products for folks, go check out the compliance bulletin. The link is in here, but it's also on the OLCC's website under bulletins. It should be the most recent bulletin if you scroll all the way down to the bottom. This really refers to extracts and concentrates that have non-marijuana terpenes added into them. And I'm not really going to go over all the nuances of how to label these products. I would just really defer you take a look at the guidance. It really lays out exactly what I'm looking for. So essentially, if a cannabinoid concentrate or extract contains an added substance, which is defined in rule, it must be labeled according to 7120 as an other cannabinoid product. So as we talked about a little earlier, that requires listing out your ingredients and the processor's place of address. So keep in mind that the ingredient list must fully and accurately capture all the ingredients in the final product. So this includes non-marijuana derived terpenes, artificial natural flavors as defined by 21 CFR 101.22, and those are the FDA's definitions right there of natural and artificial flavors. One second. And then you also have to list out carriers such as propylene glycol, MCT oil, and vegetable glycerin. That's not an exclusive list, but anything that's defined as an added substance under the rule. Yeah.
I have a question from Southern Oregon. As a cannabinoid product, all of the specific terpenes, or can it be more general, like using the word fragrance?
It can't be fragrance, but it can be more general. So if you look in the guidance, so when you're listing these ingredients, they either fall into one of two definitions under the FDA's definitions. They fall into artificial flavoring or natural flavoring. So this is not really a very nuanced discussion of this, but so natural flavoring is essentially anything that's botanically derived, anything that you can get from nature. And there's a lot of fun, interesting stuff when you read up on this. And anything that's not derived from a botanical source or from nature that falls under this definition is an artificial flavor. So when you list your ingredients, you would list it as you would list it first off as marijuana extract, non-marijuana terpenes, and then artificial and or natural flavors depending on where your terpenes come from. Think that answers their question? Okay. Once again, just really refer to the guidance. I tried to make it as clear as I could, but I understand if folks still have questions on it. So when you are submitting these labels to me, I would prefer it if you would submit ingredient documentation to me in the online system. And really the ingredient documentation essentially says to me, okay, here's what's being supplied to this processor. These products fall under natural and artificial definitions, and what's in them essentially. I do have a nice example letter. I'm sure it's very difficult to read up there, but it is in the compliance bulletin, and that letter basically outlines really what I'm looking for. I have worked with a lot of terpene suppliers already that have basically made kind of a form letter. One has even got a checkbox for the licensees to check what products they get. So they're starting to get attuned to it. Most of them shouldn't have a blank stare when you ask them about this at this point. So product identities, that's something I am going to be a stickler about because it needs to make it, the product identity needs to make it very clear to consumers that there is something else in this product other than marijuana. So a good classic example is marijuana extract with non-marijuana derived terpenes. And then if you're going the route where you're taking a terpene blend and you're flavoring it to mimic a certain strain, it would be like Blue Dream flavored marijuana concentrate. So quite frankly, I see in a lot of these products, there's maybe a dozen different strains in there. And so if you're just calling it Blue Dream extract, that's just untruthful and misleading because people are looking for certain effects when they look for Blue Dream. But if you want a flavor to taste like Blue Dream, that's great. Just let people know on the product identity and then in the ingredient list that it is something other than non-marijuana.
So can I just clarify something? If you have like a cartridge of concentrate or extract with added terpenes, that is an other cannabinoid product.
You got it. Well,
Added non-cannabis terpenes.
Non-cannabis, right?
so if you're taking cannabis terpenes and you're putting it back into extract, we still consider it as an extract. Now, you are welcome if you want to call out the ingredients. If you're doing that, you're welcome to say marijuana extract, marijuana terpenes too. That's perfectly acceptable. It's not required, but you can do it.
But it doesn't put it in the other cannabinoids category.
Right, it's still an extract. So marijuana terpenes back into marijuana extract or concentrate, still marijuana extract, not another cannabinoid product.
The terpenes are third-party terpenes?
Yes, yeah. But of course, those terpenes would have to come from an OLCC licensee with that caveat. No terpenes from California, anything like that. Did you have a question? Okay. So I hate to harp on this, but the ingredient documentation must exactly match what I'm asking for. No partial documentation. If it doesn't meet the basic requirements of what I'm looking for, I'm going to reject it. And I am also asking for a certificate of analysis. Now, these companies that are supplying you with non-marijuana terpenes should absolutely know what a COA is and what I'm looking for. I don't want the COA for the finished marijuana product because that's all in Metrc. I don't need to look at that. Moving along to the end, sort of. So we've got best practices for packaging and labeling submissions. I assume some of you are rolling your eyes at this because I'm going to say, go look at the website. But really, the website does have a lot of good nuts and bolts resources for folks. We've got the label checklist of generic label examples, which I passed out today. We've got the packaging and labeling guide, which I am working on updating. The packaging and labeling guide contains most of the new rule material, But as I see these issues pop up, I am working on updating it when I get my head above water. So that is in the pipeline. The other thing is the guide to packaging and label pre-approval process. I get folks that have absolutely no idea how you submit a package or label. And that guide, it's a little old. It got created at the beginning of the program, but it's still very relevant. It's got great screenshots of exactly the steps to take when you're submitting packaging and labeling. Hate to harp on it, but look at the rules. If you're confused, the rules always lay everything out. One thing I will say is if you haven't looked at the rules, 7030 has basically what I call the meat of the packaging and labeling rules. That really lays out a lot of the requirements. It defines what the PDP is, it defines how you list your potency, all that fun stuff. And then after that, you've got individual product category labeling rules. So like there's a whole section for edibles, whole section for topicals, et cetera, et cetera. Sign up for Gov Delivery. So you'll get blasts from the OLCC about, all the fun stuff that we're up to here at the OLCC, but, that'll keep you abreast of what's going on here. And I know signing up for Gov Delivery is a little tricky. It took me a while to figure out where the link is. So I've got a link up there in the PowerPoint that'll take you right to how to sign up for it. And if you work with other Oregon administrative agencies like OHA and ODA, I would encourage you to sign up for theirs as well. I'm signed up for it, so I get all their blasts as well. So that keeps me abreast of what everybody else is up to. Then lastly, review the compliance bulletins. Maybe there's something you missed. Maybe there's something you're going to learn. So take a look at those. So best practices. Use the label checklist. And I can't harp on this enough. I use the label checklist when I'm reviewing your labels. I've got these rules down in my head completely, but I am human, so every now and then maybe I miss something. So I will sit there, and before I finally hit that approve button, I walk down through that list and make sure every single thing is on that list, because everybody's human. I get it. Some folks might forget the UID number, or they might forget to put their processor's license number, something like that. So I would encourage you, before you submit your labels to me, before you flip that button over to make it show as new, just go through the checklist, make sure everything is on there. Keep in mind, this checklist doesn't capture all the little nuances, because this checklist is really geared towards folks making generic labels. So this will probably get you anywhere from 80 to 90% of the way there. So, you're not going to see label ID in there. This package is not child resistant. There's not going to be anything about hemp in there. So just kind of keep that in mind. Oops. Cool arrow. So contacting me. So that's my email up there, marijuana.packaging@oregon.gov. Currently, I am the only one that answers that email. So if you're communicating through that you're talking to me most of the time. I can be reached at 503-872-5459. I will say that email is typically the fastest way to get a hold of me. I bounce around a lot throughout the day, and I'm really not sitting at my desk too much. So a lot of times my voicemail can kind of get backed up, and if you have something very pertinent that you need to get addressed, send me an email. I do look at my email all day long. But I understand if you want to talk to me on the phone, more than willing to talk to folks on the phone. That's not something, I'm not trying to dissuade people from calling me up. I know sometimes everybody just wants to hear my beautiful voice and talk to me on the phone. So as a courtesy, I offer people the ability to pre-submit labels via email. So I actually prefer that method because it's a very quick and rapid way of bouncing back and forth with folks of how we can get your labels updated. So one thing I would definitely ask is be considerate when you submit these labels. Don't just dump a dozen labels off on me and say, hey, what do you think? And then not do your due diligence on the end. Like if you haven't gone through the checklist, and I see a whole bunch of errors, that does not make me very happy. And so I just encourage folks just to be considerate when they do that. And I would also encourage folks to adopt the comments that I tell you. If I'm going to sit there and review your label and be nice and give you all these comments, and then you don't adopt the comments, I'm just going to say, go submit it in the online system, and we can go through it that way. I would strongly avoid folks requesting expediency. I get it. I know that this can be the last step to getting your product out to market and making money. I understand that, and I'm fully aware of that. And that's definitely one of the pressures of the job. But I really try to be egalitarian and review everybody's labels on a first come, first served basis. So always, if you're gonna launch a new product, give yourself 4 to 6 weeks lag time. My queue right now, I'm looking at 4 to 6 weeks on label approvals. I have a very large backlog, and I try to get through it as much as I can, but just keep that in mind. You know, that's one thing, you know, I don't come to me saying, I need this product tomorrow, or we want to sell this stuff right away. That just, it can't happen. Consultations. So this is something new I'm trying out. I've met with a few licensees so far. I am very happy to provide in-person consultations here at the OLCC and possibly come out to your place of business if it's in the Portland metro area and work with you on labeling questions. And we could sit down and look at all your labels and kind of rip through them and get them all compliant with the rules. With that said, I would just ask that you be courteous. You schedule it well in advance so I can get it on my calendar and we can get a mutually agreeable time. Keep in mind, when I do advise you, you are ultimately responsible for following and complying with the rules. If you're visiting the OLCC, keep in mind, I'm sure as a lot of you are aware, there's no publicly available Wi-Fi here. So either store all your stuff digitally, bring a hotspot, or just print your labels out and we can go look at it, you know, the old school way. And I have to say this, but make sure not to bring any marijuana items to the OLCC's offices. No marijuana in the building. Now, where is Mark? There he is.
Can you just really quickly review again, like the dates and deadlines for packages in the system, or labels already in the system? So all of the existing labels are open to resubmission already?
Yeah. Yeah, so if your label was approved prior to August 15th, 2018, it's in resubmission required status. So you can transfer and package those and take those labels and bring them to retailers up until April 1st. And then those retailers have April 1st and after up until January 1st of 2020 to sell through that.
This week my team can go and redo the label.
Yes, I would love that too, because yeah, we'll get it taken care of.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. A lot of this you know or should know. So really, the advertising restrictions are really just kind of guardrails to kind of keep you compliant, and it starts off really with a list of don'ts, because that's really what it's all about from our perspective. So don't target people under the age of 21. Don't encourage illegal activity, including interstate transportation. So that would mean if you've got a print ad, don't encourage call out to state of Washington residents to come over and purchase product because the sales tax rate is less or it's a better deal, because that would certainly be encouraging them to come over and take it back, because we don't have public consumption in Oregon at this time, so they're not going to consume it in our state necessarily. Don't make false claims about product safety, curative, or therapeutic effects. You know, as of right now, you know, there's no you know, conclusive, bona fide data in terms of efficacy, in terms of medical benefits and that sort of thing. So those claims aren't allowed. Don't display consumption of marijuana items or encourage excessive use. Don't advertise with handbills distributed in public places. So you don't go to an event or any kind of activity and stick those handbills in people's underneath their windshield wipers doing any kind of advertising. Then don't utilize TV, radio, billboards, print, or internet advertising where more than 30% of the audience is under the age of 21. Believe it or not, I get questions and comments from the public, oftentimes about billboards or electronic billboards, especially that may be proximate to a school or on a walk path to a school, and will question whether or not you know, that falls under the 30% or hits the 30% rule. From our perspective, it doesn't. But if you're using you know, like a digital platform or a periodical or anything like that, that there's going to be some crossover into an audience that's got teenagers or young adults or folks that are under 21. Just step back and take an assessment and get some circulation or view information from the publisher of those particular mediums. And then don't use location-targeted media, for smartphones. Same concept. Unless there's an app that's installed by someone who's 21 years of age or older, and it also offers them the ability to opt out of that feature if they'd like to. Here are a couple of do's. Do include an all print billboard, TV, radio, and internet advertising in font size legible to a consumer. The 3 warnings: do not operate a vehicle or machinery under the influence of this drug, for use only by adults 21 years of age and older, and keep out of the reach of children. Now, not to call anybody out, and not to find fault with this publication, but if any of you are in here, take a look. We did, and most of the advertisements in here are not compliant because typically they don't have the 3 warnings. Now, if a member of the public raises that with us, we take it in as a compliance issue, and then we take a look at it. It's really just good form for those of you that are aspirational for serving a national market, whenever that comes about, that you can imagine that whatever regulatory scheme is in our state or may be applied federally, it's just going to be like the warnings on cigarette labels, cigarette advertising, alcohol labels, alcohol advertising. We don't call that out, but I would generally say that you should apply that same method. Now, so the issue about being around the 30% issue, no, but it should have the warnings on them as well. Yeah. We don't explicitly say that they're not allowed. So, and again, so that was when I started off by saying these are guardrails. So.
Meaning that, like, if I'm posting 3 times a day on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or something, does every single post that my clients are making need to have the warnings associated with every single post? Alternatively, is it something that can be in the header of the account or the information asset on the account?
Yeah, so again, we don't call that out, but you actually hit on probably what our guidance would be, which would be, so no, not necessarily every single post, but at the landing page, or that it's prominent before you get down into it. And actually, so the last thing down there is, it sort of gets to this a little bit in a different way, is do use an age gate on your website. So initially, when the industry was starting out, there weren't a lot of age gates on websites, and that's commonplace in the distilled spirits and alcohol industry. Even if you're going to their vanity sites and they're not actually selling product. What else? Discounting is allowed. Buy one, get one? No, that's not allowed. Customer loyalty programs for cannabis? No. Cannabis loyalty programs for non-regulated or non-taxed product? Yes. And the reason why is the keyword is taxed product.
When you mentioned that discount and advertising is allowed, is that for retailers, processors, producers, for everybody? Can everybody advertise a discount?
Well, most of the advertising that we see is aimed for the retail market, in terms of what we're interested in, or what this focuses on is on sales tax collection. So if you're a wholesaler discounting your product to a retailer, that's not something, that's a business transaction, that's not a taxable event in our eyes. So what this really focuses on is on the retail level. Does that make sense? Or, yeah.
Well, just curious.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's, with producers or processors, we work then with retail people and can offer discounts.
Yeah.
Ourselves.
Right.
Through that.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to.
And also what I was going to point out to you is, again, and these are two compliance education bulletins that we kind of refer to this. So one, these are from last year, 2017-03, refers to, kind of gives another synopsis of the advertising restrictions, and then 1705 talks about discounting marijuana and sales to medical card holders. And then, again, you can find the rules from 845, 025, 8000 to 8080. And I think with that, we're at Q&A time.
Can you put that rule, what was that rule?
Oh,
8,000?
yeah. Yeah, so we'll make any changes or corrections to, so I should say this before everybody begins to depart, we'll make changes and corrections to the PowerPoint, and we'll have the recorded version of this presentation available for viewing sometime probably later this afternoon, and we'll put the link on our website, and it'll be on the OLCC YouTube page. The presentation, yeah, it'll be in a PDF form.
Okay, Keith.
California and Washington have been adopting a standard for flexible packaging film where 4 mil or thicker is considered child resistant. Is there any thought of Oregon following that?
Not to my knowledge, but if it is certified as child resistant by meeting those requirements, I'm not going to cite the federal child resistance certification, but if it is, then you're absolutely welcome to submit it. But I would just have to see that certification.
Just a quick point for clarification. Is the potency not required to be on the PDP?
No, you can put the potency wherever you want. So PDP is just universal symbol, product identity, net weight, or volume. But you can put other elements on the PDP, but at a bare minimum, you must have those 3 things. Yeah.
For the small jars, tiny jars, the PDP is the top of the lid.
Most likely.
And can you clarify again the requirements for what would have to be on the top of the lid versus the wraparound?
So on a small container, you have to have the product identity, net weight or volume, and so not net volume, but net weight, and then the universal symbol. So if it's a tiny container, you would have the universal symbol and the product identity. But, don't take what I'm saying. I just cited it correctly, but definitely look at the rules. I would encourage you to take a look at the rules for those specific requirements.
I have a couple. So for the health claims, relieving, calming, extra strength, is that considered health claims?
Those vague kind of generalized claims are fine.
Those are
Yeah,
fine.
and with health claims, I look at the totality of it, because you might have, you might say relief, but you might have some icons that show, like achy bones or something like that. And so I look at the whole totality of the label, not just what one sentence says.
Okay. And then for everything switching over to the other cannabinoid and concentrates and extracts, cartridges used to be really straightforward in Metrc, and now they're kind of all over the place. As retailers, our POS system isn't integrated. We're relying on what's in Metrc to know how to correctly categorize it. So are vendors held responsible for correctly categorizing their product?
I would say so, but ultimately I can't speak to what the compliance is around that, because that's just really not within my realm.
So if the vendor's depending on Metrc, I should contact the compliance person to find out who's responsible for ensuring that that's correct?
Yes, I would talk to your inspector. Yeah, if you have an inspector that you've got a rapport with, I would certainly get in touch with them. And I don't know if everybody's aware here. I figure I'll just throw this gem out here. If you have Metrc questions, our CTS team has their own email here. It's marijuana.cts@oregon.gov. So if you do have Metrc questions that are specific to how we track it, send an email to them.
Okay, and then one more question about packaging. For the usable marijuana leaving the store, I mean, can 28 grams go out in just a single-use Mylar bag?
If it's certified as child resistant for single use, yeah,
Okay.
it has to be certified.
No, I know, but that's just ridiculous. That's not receivable. Okay.
Yes.
I have two questions about resubmissions. When resubmitting, you know how you unlock the application pretty much and you're able to delete the files?
Yeah.
Is that what you want us to do, or do you just want us to upload the new ones, but then put like a date so that you know that it's not part of the?
It's basically dependent on what your situation is. So if you have labels that are approved prior to August 15th that are just sitting there that you want, and they should be there, so folks can see, you know, if we need to take a look and see if these labels are approved, they should be sitting there. So if you wanted to, you could update all your new labels that you're submitting. You know, you would just put the current date, you know, like December, whatever today is, September 14th. You know, that just make it clear and helpful to me. I mean, this isn't a legal requirement or a rule requirement. It's just kind of just doing me a favor and making it clear. Yeah.
And then the other one would be, so now that I know, for example, we started a lotion, cannabis-infused lotion, and 6 months later we started a hemp-infused lotion. So now I know that I can put it both under the same submission. So when I resubmit, what would be the best practice to resubmitting under that one instead of having to do it on both and having to pay the 25 fee for both?
So is this where you have two existing applications
Exactly.
already?
Exactly.
So if they're both under resubmission required, that means you can edit it, right?
Mhm.
So what you can do is you can just leave that existing one of them under resubmission required status and just use it for a future product.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
So, you know, if you've got labels that are under resubmission required and you don't want to use those labels anymore, you've already paid for it. So you might as well just save it for a future use, and you can change the name, and you can, yeah, just completely switch the product that's in there.
Okay, and then I have an advertising question for you. So I primarily work with topicals, which we advertise as non-intoxicating or non-psychoactive. Would that be considered a false claim because it's not FDA approved or it hasn't been regulated in that sense? Non-intoxicating or non-psychoactive, if we claim, would that be considered a false claim, or would it be okay?
I think that's a more nuanced discussion, and if you want afterwards, give me your contact information and I'll get in touch with you about that, because that's one we haven't really admittedly probably thought of, so, yeah.
In the process of resubmission, one of the things that happens is a lot of times the information itself will get rearranged, but the PDP remains static. Are you still okay with those resubmissions, not having a resubmission if things are moved around, as long as it's not affecting the PDP?
Yes, that's fine, as long as you're not deleting required information, yeah, but, yeah, but if you're changing colors, you know, just to be totally obvious here, if you're adding different colors on your boxes or something like that, then yes, you have to resubmit.
My company produces generic labels, but we allow images to be added on currently. Will we have to submit a proof back to them for them to submit to you, or can they submit the image of the logo they want to add to our label?
No, because I can't just approve a general logo. So you have to submit some kind of product label along with the
So
logo.
we'll just set up a proofing process, and then they give it to you, and then we can.
Yeah, and then so in your POS system, you'll have to do the label ID too, because you're gonna get assigned one.
We already got the label ID, even though we weren't sure where it was going to be for until
Good to hear, I
today,
like to
but,
hear that, all right. Anybody else? Keith, man, you got a lot.
Sorry. My apologies. When we got the change requisition form, is that per label, or can you do multiple labels on that?
Per, so yeah, I know it's a little bit tedious, but yeah, per label, per package, yeah, so one for each, one form, one, I mean, you can,
Even if it's iterations of the same label?
Oh, if it's for, it just has to be for a label application. So if you've got label application 1, 2, 3, 4, and you want to change all the iterations within that label,
Right.
that's fine, just one form,
Okay, great.
yeah. So all those iterations that are under that one label umbrella, that's fine. Anybody else? Going once, going twice? Okay.
So on pre-rolls, the net weight has has to be in the bottom third of the PDP, but the usable marijuana weight does not have to be in that bottom third?
Usable marijuana can be wherever you'd like.
Perfect.
But yeah, as long as you're just making it clear, if you have, multi-pack, the best way to do it is I always see people, 5 pre-rolls on the PDP. You just call out how much is in each pre-roll and your product identity. That's a great way just to take care of those 2 requirements right there. Anything else? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Dr. Lum, with testing, say with edibles, the test results for potency, before it had been, you can do the calculation or you can do kind of a range, like the 10% range in there. Is that still the case?
Yes, depending on, so I'm not going to talk about the test results or how to list test results in depth, but essentially they are an average of what's taken under the OHA's rules. So I'm not going to get too involved in that. And I think what you're referring to are target potencies with edible limits. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay, so for edibles, so we all know the limits for edibles are 5 and 50, right? And those are set by OHA. So our current rules don't allow for you to have anything over 50 milligrams, and it's very clear in the rules. The rules absolutely just say, no, you can't do it. But we're going to revise our rules, and I don't know if you've all seen the draft language, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to allow for a 10% plus or minus variance. So here's the classic example. So everybody wants to say, I've got the max. So you put 50 milligrams on your front. That's what's called your target potency. So target potency of 50 milligrams. But the rules require you to list somewhere on your label the accurate lab calculated value. Now that lab calculated value can be within 10% plus or minus of your target potency. So you have an upper limit of 55 and 5.5, and then you have a lower limit of 45, 4.5, and that is completely compliant with the rules.
You can pick a number anywhere in there, or it has to be listed as a range?
No, it doesn't have to be listed as a range, but the actual lab calculated value can be within that range plus or minus 10% of your target potency. And so I use 50 as the common example because that's pretty much what everybody puts as their target potency, because that's the max. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
What day or when is that being voted on?
I don't know. Our commission meeting is this week, and they are going to vote to adopt the rules, so I don't quite have a timeline for that, but that is currently how I interpret the rules, so that is de facto the rule right now. Thank you all for coming.